Welcome students. This is lecture number 10 of real-time operating system. In this lecture we are going to study about the timers along with interrupts and DMA. So let's start with timers. So what is timers are meant for? Timers are you can say it basically used for counting out the time, because you have seen in embedded system there are so many requirements of time calculation to create a delay in your event, to calculate the time of certain event, or to do some periodic task. Everywhere you need a timing model which will help you count the time. So timer is one utility provided by the microprocessors and microcontroller to calculate the time by using some hardware along with some softwares. Fine. So let's see what timer is. So before going to the timer, how do we calculate the time in a real world scenario? We calculate the time in the real world scenario based on the clock. So in our general purpose daily uses, what do we use? We use the analog clocks with a minimum calculated time, minimum calculable time, that is in seconds. There are also industrial and scientific clocks available that can calculate with more precision. And even if you take your mobile phone, it calculates in milliseconds also. So if you take our normal analog clock, it can calculate into some seconds. Fine. So the analog clock that we are using in our day-to-day life cannot be used in the digital scenario. So there is a clock present in the digital scenario that is known as a digital clock, or simply if you talk about embedded systems, microprocessors, microcontroller, this digital clock is named as a clock. So as all we are aware that timing is very important in every scenario, and it is also having the same importance in the digital circuits. Fine. Why it is important in a digital circuit? Because we are having the control and monitoring operations done by the digital devices like embedded systems, so timing is very important. Fine. Then we are having the sequential circuit which are synchronous, like flip-flops, registers and counters. They all are driven by the clock circuit. That means the devices which are developed using these flip-flop, registers and counters as a building block will also be a clock driven devices. So microprocessor uses these devices as a components like flip-flops and registers and counters. So they are also clock driven. Microprocessors and microcontrollers are clock driven, and this clock can be an internal clock or external clock. So this is one sample clocks provided in this diagram. So this clock is something like this. We have the lowest value as 0 and highest value as 5 volts, so you can name it as high, low and high. And this is the design of the digital clock signal. This is generally producing a square wave, and this is used to count the time. And the clock frequency, or you can say that the time period, is very important. So this is one time period of your clock, and this is what the minimum amount you can measure. That means this t will be atomic one, and you cannot go uh, beyond this limit. That means least you have to calculate in the periods, in the multiples of t only. So this t value is given in this. So the higher is your clock frequency, the lower will be the time period, because we all know that time period is inversely proportional to the frequency. So in the modern devices you have seen like higher frequencies are present, like in megahertz and gigahertz devices are present, so they can perform things in a faster way because the t is reduced, so they can do certain event in a lesser time. Fine. And this all not only depends on the clock, it also depends on the circuit performance. So clock signals are generally square wave signals which oscillates between a high and a low value. So this is a periodic signal only which oscillates between a and low value. It can be generated by using a crystal oscillator and clock generator. We have two ways to generate the clock signals. So crystal oscillator are something like we have two plates and there is a quartz crystal which oscillates it in between to generate a signal, and there are techniques which used to reshape this into a a square wave signal. So clock generator are a circuit which includes oscillator plus the reshaping circuits. So these are the two ways by which we can generate the clock signals. Timers are important components of a microprocessor and microcontroller based design. Timer plays important role in embedded system and IoT application, which I have already discussed, like in the control and monitoring applications. Timer plays a very important role because if you are not able to calculate that time, you cannot do a control task. Fine. If you are talking about any monitoring task, then again you need to have a, suppose you want to monitor a plant, so you need to have a periodic data collection mechanism. That means every 1 second or every 2 second or every 10 second. So this requires again the time lapse to be calculated for the periodic task. It maintains the timing of operation. Yes, it maintains the timing of operation. That means suppose you are taking a periodic task, so it can be the periodic task can be running after 10 second, 20 second, 30 seconds, something like this. So timer is important. Then works in synchronization with the system clock. Yes, timers are used in the synchronization of the system clock because the time that is calculated with the help of clock only, that is used to do some event based on the timers. It can be used to create a delay, it can be used to measure time, and it can be used to generate the baud rate. Fine. It counts the number of clock. That means if you want to calculate 10 milliseconds, so how it will calculate 10 millisecond? It will calculate 10 millisecond based on the number of clock ticks. Clock tick is what? If your clock signal is going from for 1 t, it will be a 1 clock tick. Now we have taken two microprocessor. 80851 consists of two timers, T0 and T1. Both are 16-bit simply binary counters to count the number of clock pulses. Now if we talk about ATmega 32, it contains three timers, so named as timer 0, timer 1 and timer 2. So timer 0 is a 8-bit timer, and timer 1 is a 16-bit timer, and also timer 2 is a 8-bit timer. Okay, so this was about the timers. Now in the next section we are going to study interrupts. And interrupts are basically signals to the CPU that there is some urgent event happening, or there is some event happened that needs to be considered, and this is a request to the CPU, and the CPU checks if the particular signal has to be acknowledged or it can be skipped. So let's see interrupts in detail. Interrupts are a special signal used to inform the microprocessor about certain asynchronous event which requires consideration. Fine. That means interrupts are a bit different from the general signals. They are special signals designed in the microprocessor which informs the microprocessor about occurrence of an event. So that event may be a urgent event, that may be event may be a normal informative event. So this information reaches to the CPU with the help of the interrupt. Now with the help of interrupts, an external device can get the attention of the microprocessor. So suppose your microprocessor is doing some work and there is one, two or more input output devices or some external devices is connected with the CPU. How this CPU knows that the device wants an interaction with the CPU? With the help of interrupts. The most simple example may be a mouse click or a keyboard hit. Keyboard hit means there is a button press on your keyboard. This information flows to the microprocessor with the help of an interrupt. Based on the interrupt signal, the microprocessor takes the discussion on what to do after receiving the interrupt signal. Fine. The interrupt service routine, also known as ISR, is the function or procedure which is used to handle the interrupt. So in most of the cases, interrupts are well defined and the corresponding interrupt service routine is well defined. So the processor knows that if certain event is happening or a certain interrupt is occurring, what to do with that particular event, and this particular event is written in the form of interrupt service routine. That means this is a kind of function, or you can say it is a procedure that needs to be followed. So this is nothing but a code block only, that needs to be followed when there is a interrupt. Now, how the microprocessor handles the interrupt? The microprocessor handles the interrupt by pausing the current execution and starting the new execution. So, how the microprocessor pauses the current execution? It depends on the microprocessor context. Context means the current state of the microprocessor. Current context includes registers, PC values, and SP values. This is same thing that you have studied in your operating system. The context. So the what microprocessor does, whenever it receives the interrupt, it saves the current context and goes for the handling of the interrupt by following the interrupt service routine, which is again a code, and after completing with the interrupt service routine, it comes back and resumes the execution, which is has paused in the form of context. There are two types of interrupt based on the avoidability of the micro interrupt. One is known as the maskable interrupt and other is known as the non-maskable interrupt. So the interrupts which are very urgent or very important with the CPU, that needs the the quick handling of the interrupt, will require will be coming into the category of non-maskable interrupt, and those maskable interrupts which can be avoided comes under the category of maskable interrupts. Fine. So example of a non-maskable interrupt is the reading from your temperature sensor in your CPU. So if that temperature sensor generates that your CPU is exceeding the maximum operating temperature, it will generate an interrupt, and CPU must handle this thing to avoid the burning of the motherboard or the IC. So these kind of interrupts are non-maskable interrupts. The second categorization of interrupts is based on the location or address of the interrupt service routine. So I have already told that interrupts are well known in most of the cases. So the interrupt service routine is predefined and stored in a certain location. So when the address of the ICR is provided to the CPU directly, or it can also be provided with the help of interrupt signals. So based on this, interrupt can be divided into two types. One is a vectored, where the address of the service routine is hardwired. So here hardwired means the service routine address is known to the CPU. That means the interrupt is coming with a code, and that code is having a predefined location for the interrupt service routine, and the CPU follows the same interrupt service routine. Now talking about the non-vectored interrupt. So in the case of non-vectored interrupt, the address of the service routine needs to be supplied externally. That means along with the interrupt signal, we can send the location of the interrupt service routine. Coming to the next categorization of interrupts. So interrupts can be of two types. One is known as the external interrupt. In this category we have three types of interrupt: external interrupt, internal interrupt, as well as a software interrupt. So external interrupts are used by the input output devices to interact with the CPU. Like I have taken the example of keyboard hit or mouse click. How it improves the system performance? It improves the system performance by allowing the CPU to execute instruction instead of just waiting for the IO devices. So this is just the example of blocking and non-blocking calls. Like in your C program, if you have written a scanf statement, so now what can a CPU do when you are not providing the input? Will it wait infinitely in the scanf statement, or the CPU can perform other tasks? So in normal scenario, the CPU will start other task and keep this process in a blocked state until there is an input from the user, and this input from the user create an interrupt which inform the CPU that there is an interrupt coming. So when the CPU handles that interrupt, it knows that there is a data from the input device. So in this way, the CPU performance is improved with the help of the external interrupts. Talking about the internal interrupts, this occurs internally to the CPU used in task switching. You have seen context switching. So like round robin, that time quantum expires, then there is a task switching occurs. So these kind of interrupts are internal interrupts. Talking about the software interrupts, so we have specific instructions provided along with the microprocessor that can generate software interrupts. Other example of software interrupts can be where like divide by zero error or some exception in your program is coming, that can also create a software interrupt. Now coming to the next section, that is the direct memory access. But before going to the direct memory access, we will just review all the data transfer mechanism that occurs between a CPU and a input output device. So if you talk about the mode of transfer, we have three modes of transfer: programmed IO, interrupt initiated IO, and direct memory access. So data transfer between the CPU and IO, data transfer between the CPU and IO means input output device, may be handled in variety of modes. So what this variety of modes means, this variety of modes means that this data transfer can occur with the help of CPU or without the help of CPU. So DMA is one technique which does not uses the CPU for transferring the data, whereas programmed IO and interrupt IO uses the CPU as an intermediary for transferring the data. So let's see, this is your CPU and this is your input output device, fine, and in this CPU you have CPU registers. So if there is an involvement of data transfer, that means you are using the CPU register for reading and writing the data, then it will be a data transfer mechanism which is using the CPU register. So DMA does not uses the CPU, which we'll see in detail. Now let's see what are the modes of transfer. So first mode of data transfer is programmed IO. In the programmed IO we have special instructions provided, and these instructions are used to take the data from the input output devices. So results from the input output instructions. Usually instructions transfer data from the CPU register to input output to transfer data. Another instruction is needed to transfer it into the memory. That means suppose in 8085 we have instructions like in and out for the programmed data transfer. Now talking about the interrupt initiated IO. So in this interrupt initiated IO, your microprocessor will be informed with the help of interrupts that now the data is present. So the external interrupt we have seen, so external interrupt is used as an interrupt initiated input output devices. Now talking about DMA is known as the direct memory access, which uses a special processor for data transfer, that is known as the DMA processor or DMA controller. So we'll see its detail in the later slides. Coming to the programmed IO. So this results from the input output instruction. You have seen different instruction sets of different microprocessor, and there are input output instructions present in every microprocessor's instruction set. So usually instruction transfers the data from the CPU and IO registers. To transfer data, another instruction is needed to transfer it into the memory. In this mode, the CPU stays in the loop until the IO is ready for the data transfer. That means in programmed IO you have CPU wait cycles, but in the interrupt driven cycle, interrupt initiated IO, you don't have the wait cycle. So in the case of programmed IO you have CPU wait cycles, and this instruction is says like that, this is your CPU, this is your IO devices, and this is your main memory. So for transferring the data from IO to main memory, first it will go to the register and then it will go to the main memory. Fine. So this is an example of programmed IO. This is your CPU or microprocessor, and this is your input output devices. We have data bus, address bus, and input output buses are there. This is your IO devices. There is an interface. So this is a part of input output subsystem. There is a status register which says about that status of the device. This is a data register. So this is the IO buses. So if you take, this is complete part of IO plus interface. So this is IO and this is your IO interface, and this is your CPU. So from the data is coming to the interface and then it reaches to the microprocessor. So this is the way how data is transferred. First the status register is checked, then the flag bit is checked. So status register will tell that if the data is present or not, and flag register will tell that if the data is valid or not. So if flag is 1, then read the data register, transfer data to the memory, and if the operation is complete, no, so continue with the yes, so continue with the program. If no, then again read the status register. Now second category of input output is the interrupt initiated IO. So interrupt initiated IO is that saves the CPU wait cycle. What it does, whenever a process goes for input output or request, it blocks the particular process and starts doing some other task, and when there is a data present in the input output device, it creates an interrupt to the CPU, and CPU handles that interrupt by reading the data from that. So it saves the CPU cycles. Now interrupt initiated IO can be of non-vectored and vectored, that as we have discussed in the type of interrupts. And then we have software considerations, like which IO routine to be followed. Fine. And this is why what I want to tell you, that since in your system you have multiple IO devices, like device 0, device 1, and device 2, something like that, and every device has associated priority with that P0, P1, and P2, something like this. So based on this priority, we have to generate a system so that the higher priority device will get first request. So in this particular category, we will see the daisy chaining. Fine. So our focus will be on daisy chaining. So okay, let's review polling and parallel priority first. So in polling, we have to identify. Polling means what? Asking. So we are handling the interrupt driven IO, interrupt initiated IO, and what we are doing, we are asking every device. Fine. And now why how you will be asking, you will asking the highest priority device first, then second highest priority device, then third highest priority device. So in this way the higher device priority device will be served first. Now this is our focus about daisy chaining. Daisy chaining is used in I2C protocol also. So let's see the diagram first. This is your daisy chaining mechanism. So let me explain daisy chaining. So daisy chaining is a serial arrangement of devices, serial arrangement of devices to process interrupt in the order of priority, to process interrupt in the order of priority. Fine. So you can see that device 1, 2, and 3, has a back-to-back connection, back-to-back connections, and in that we have two pins present on every device. So PI stands for priority in, and PO stands for out. So let's see, this is the arrangement. In this arrangement there is a back to back connection of devices, and the priority of a device is decided, priority of the device is decided based on the proximity of the CPU. So this is the arrangement. Let's go back to the theory. In this method of interconnecting devices, in which IO request IO in a serial manner. That means devices can request input output in a serial manner. So in daisy chaining, the device with the highest priority is kept nearest to the CPU, and priority is managed by the proximity to the CPU. That means the device which is nearer to the CPU will be having a higher priority. In this arrangement, the highest priority device will get the first chance to raise the interrupt first, and if it is having no interrupt, the next device will get the chance to raise the interrupt, and so on. So in this way the daisy chaining goes on. So let's look in this diagram again. So there is a common interrupt request line that is connected with the CPU. That means either device 0, device 1 or device 2, if any of the device generates an request, the CPU knows that there is a interrupt request present. Fine. But the CPU needs to fulfill the request of the highest priority device first. So there is a acknowledgement line going on this device. So this interrupt line may be high. Suppose at a time D0 and D1 both has requested for the interrupt, so it needs to be served D0 first. So it will go and ask to D0. Fine. So device 0, or in this scenario it is named as device 1. So device 1, it is asked to the device 1 if you have requested for a interrupt. So since this has not requested the interrupt, so there is 1 going on. So what it does, it passes the same value to the next device. Now the chance or the token is with the device 2. So device 2 is now having the chance to reply, and since device 2 has requested for the interrupt, so it will make this line as valid, uh, and supplies 0 to the next device. When it supplies 0 to the next device, that means this device knows that interrupt is already acknowledgement. So even if this device has requested for the IO operation, this will not getting a chance right now. Now this valid bit is connected with the, this line is connected with the processor data bus, and it will provide the ISR address to the CPU. So in this way a daisy chaining arrangement is present, which process the interrupt IO request based on the priority of the device. Now coming to our focus, that is DMA. So what DMA is, DMA removes the CPU for data transfer. Why? Because suppose this is your input output device and it wants to transfer 10 GB of data to the memory. Fine, this is your memory, and this memory will be written to the secondary memory, something like this. So if you involve CPU every time, then the process will be much slower, and if you remove the CPU and there will be a direct transfer going on, it will be faster, obviously, because every data is going to CPU. So every register will be copied then back to the memory. So for the transfer, or you can say that when we are having a large chunk of data needs to be transferred, then DMA can be used, like copying a memory from a disk or something like this. So DMA is used. So data transfer between a fast storage media such as magnetic disk and memory unit is limited by the speed of the CPU. Thus, we can allow the peripheral directly communicate with each other using the memory bus, removing the intervention of CPU. So when we remove the intervention of CPU, the speed will become fast. This type of data transfer technique is known as DMA or direct memory access. During the DMA, the CPU is idle and it has no control over the memory buses. The DMA controller takes over the buses to manage the transfer directly between the IO and the memory unit. Fine. So let me draw this. So there is one more device coming into the picture, that is known as the DMA controller. So the transfer will now become something like this. Okay, so the transfer will become something like this. This is your DMA controller, so name as DMA controller. This is your CPU and this is your IO devices. Fine, and this is your memory. So in the normal scenario, something the data transfer is going something like this. Now when the DMA controller comes into the picture, it takes the memory buses from the CPU, buses from the CPU, all the three buses from the CPU, and proceeds with the data transfer. And when the data transfer is completed, it returns the authority of the buses to the CPU. So this is not an easy task to ask the CPU for losing the control. So there are special requests provided by authorized DMA controller. So first it requests a bus grant. So when a DMA controller first asks the CPU to provide or lease the lines, and when it receive the CPU can give the grant to the DMA controller, and when the DMA controller receives the authority of all the buses, it initiates the data transfer. So total three types of DMA modes are present. One is known as the bus transfer, other is known as the cycle stealing, and third one is the interleaved mode. When you talk about bus transfer, in bus transfer what happens, the whole data is transferred. That means DMA controller first requests to the CPU to provide the buses. When there is a grant request successfully granted, then the DMA controller comes into the picture and start the data transfer. And when the data transfer completed, then the DMA transfers all the bus control to the CPU. Fine. Second mode is the cycle stealing mode. So in the cycle stealing mode, whenever there is it's a kind of architecture, that means when CPU cycles are free, that means your CPU is doing some task, and in between DMA is taking the bus access and transfer the CPU. That means it's going on simultaneously. That means CPU does not halt for a longer duration. The CPU works as well as the DMA controller work in a sync. And third one is the interleaved mode. In the interleaved mode, the DMA controller takes over the system buses when the microprocessor is not using it. So in the burst mode, for the data transfer, the whole authority is transferred during the data transfer. In the cycle stealing, the the DMA takes some cycles in between from the CPU for the data transfer. But in the interleaved mode, only when the CPU is free, that is can be used for the DMA data transfer. So this completes discussion, and thank you.